Let's Get To presents Go Go Astros, a focus on H-Town hardball.
And welcome to Go Astros. Another week has gone by. We've got Andy here and Brian's back, so that's fun. Brian, I assume you had a fun, pleasant Rosh Hashanah?
Lashana Tova to all our audience, and you need me to translate that. I'll figure it out one day.
Right. We'll pass it over to Jess Canaster to get the full breakdown on that. But yeah, another week. Let's talk real quick about the week in review. Brian, Andy and I spoke last week about how sort of pedestrian it's all been. It seems like it's remaining to feel pretty pedestrian. They went out and they've won 6 of their last 10. They have clinched home field throughout the playoffs. Anything stick out to you about the previous 6 or 7 games?
No. I mean, your point about it being pedestrian is right. I guess the one thing to sort of note is they're not mailing in the end of the season, both in terms of, they're putting out the first choice lineup every game of the Rays series because Dusty Baker talked about the integrity of the game that he needs to respect. What's going to happen, the seeding for the Rays, and of course the Phillies have not clinched the playoffs, so they'll continue to do that in the upcoming series. And they're also seem to be taking competitive at bats, throwing good pitches, and seem to be, playing ball like they're always playing ball. And so, is that a good sign for the playoffs? It's not a bad sign, that's for sure.
Andy, what are your thoughts? I mean, how much of it also, Andy, is that the 5-day break that looms, right?
I mean, well, I think there's a number of factors that we've mentioned a few of them already, but 28-man roster means you just don't have that many options for position players to throw a AAA lineup out there. There's just not. The 5 days off, no matter what we do, is looming. So guys need their at-bats because simulated games and batting practice help keep guys sharp, but there's nothing that compares to actual game play. I think the third thing is that, as Dusty has said, if the teams we are playing have something to play for, we have to take those games seriously, which, goes to what Brian spoke to as the integrity of the game. I did appreciate that they were clearly working on some bottom of the ninth scenarios with runners on, which is the only reason I can think of that Presley and Montero let so many guys get on in the ninth and on the last 2 games. And just toyed with them because that was fun. It's always good to let Tampa Bay know, who their daddy is.
I do want to get to one on-game sort of on-field development before we talk a little bit different. Framber Valdez the last 2 weeks last 2 starts has struggled. Normally, I would chalk up some of that hysteria to sort of Astros Twitter panicking, which of course we know they're wont to do. But Andy, 2 in a row. How much of it are you concerned? I'm sort of at a 3%. Where are you?
I don't even think I'm that. Framber Valdez didn't have a bad game in his last start. Jeremy Pena had a bad game in his last start that directly led to, I think, 4 of the 6 runs that Framber gave up. He missed 2 really easy. One was a double play ball. One was a ball he should have made the play at first, and just flubbed the pickup to his glove. That's more concerning to me because one of the things we have built this playoff juggernaut machine, whatever you want to call it, over the last 5 years on is really steady defense, especially up the middle. Jeremy Pena shows flashes of being really, really, really good. And then he has games where he's really, really, really not. His footwork is still not where it needs to be. Certainly not at the level of what Carlos Correa was. But even Carlos Correa isn't what Carlos Correa was last year, where he was the best defensive player in all of baseball. So Pena is far more of a concern to me. And it really comes down to concentration level. I think he is saying the right things and trying the right things, and certainly is benefiting from hitting in the 2 spot. But he's got to start paying more attention and keeping his head in the game when he's in the field.
Brian, what about you? I mean, you take I know you're more the numbers guy, and I look at the numbers, and he's still got an ERA well under 3. So with all of that.
Yeah, and I looked up the numbers because someone asked me to on Twitter yesterday. In his last 3 starts, 16.2 innings pitched, 15 Ks, 5 walks, so a very good ratio there. Not as many Ks as usual. And while he's got a 6.48 ERA, it's a 3.78 FIP, in large part because his BABIP is at 379, which goes to the defensive issues that Andy was talking about. But BABIP is mostly luck. Its balls are sort of finding holes. So I'm less concerned. Having looked up the numbers, I'm less concerned about Framber than the surface numbers are, or than my friends texting me are.
I'm with you. The thing I am concerned about is off the field, and we're going to bring that up now because for those of you who are watching the show, and maybe Brian doesn't fully, my background, or a part of my background at least, is in film and media studies. I'm very aware of the impact that the media has on life. And we see it in politics all the time, and we're starting to see it in Houston as sports fans. We talked last week, or maybe it was the week before, about not really feeling that the lack of contract for Dusty or Click is going to be a distraction on the team. Upon further review, I absolutely think the lack of contract for Click will have no effect on the team. The general manager, I think at this point, particularly once rosters are picked for each playoff series, his role really starts to diminish when it comes to the impact. My concern is you have a players manager in Dusty Baker. These guys clearly love him. You could see the concept of maybe putting extra pressure on yourself to win the World Series so Dusty keeps his job. And all of that kind of played out with, unfortunately, making you guys read a Brian T. Smith article to see that that's where it's coming. Andy, has your position on this at all changed? And part of that too is, what are some of your issues you have with sports media today? I mean, we talked already about, we see Aaron Judge's every time he takes a crap, we get interrupted. We saw no interruptions for Albert Pujols, even though I think that number was much more impressive. So where are you on all of this?
It's a manipulative industry by design, because in large part the idea of, and my degree, although my practice has not been in a really long time, my degree is in journalism. The principles of journalism are not something that are really practiced by especially online media, and really even newspapers these days when it comes to sports departments. The idea of columnists versus beat reporters, the lines have blurred dramatically, where people like Brian T. Smith and Chandler Rome and a couple of people who preceded Chandler Rome all decided to become part of the story versus reporting on what's going on without opining on what they're seeing. And that's always been a slippery slope. Yellow journalism is not a new thing. And I don't know that we're quite to that point, but you could certainly make that argument. To the actual, issue at hand, I think it is probably unprecedented, although I'm not going to go search back 175 years of baseball history to see a World Series contender's entire front office or manager slot and general manager slot be replaced for the next season. And that's potentially what we're looking at. But to do the gotcha journalism that seems to be happening and throwing the questions out to Dusty when it's not really Dusty's issue, or throwing the questions out to Click when Click clearly isn't going to say anything, and then creating conspiracies after that. It could be as simple as two guys who decided they don't want to work together anymore in Crane and Click, and that's it. But professionally, they're not going to talk about it until the time's appropriate, because Click is still under a contract until probably November 1st. I don't know exactly how those timelines run. But people like Brian T. Smith, people like Chandler Rome,
Who has blocked you again. So welcome
he
back.
has. I'm happy about that. I will tell you why I'm not concerned about the whole thing, because as we're talking, I'm strolling through Mark Berman's Twitter feed, not a mention of any of this. And if there's one guy in the Houston market that actually does his job the way I think a journalist is supposed to do their job, it's Mark Berman. He's not participating in this mudslinging.
Brian, I'm going to give you then a two-part question, because you and I discussing this offline, and you, ultimately, I think correctly lay this at, if there's any issue, you lay it at Crane's feet. We all know that journalists are going to do that. So where are you on that? And do you think it's as simple as I did more digging, the concept that maybe Click and Crane just don't like each other, and maybe it's just going to be a mutual parting of ways if that's what it comes down to?
Yeah, I don't know if it's mutual parting of ways because I'm not sure where Click's going after this, but in the end, the reason this is a story is because primarily Jim Crane has not signed his lame ducks to future contracts. And when asked about it by Mark Berman, he said, I'll deal with it at the end of the season. And here's where I'm going to part ways with Andy a little. Mark Berman tends to be more stenographer than journalist. Or maybe that's why he's a good journalist, is because he tends to be a stenographer. Didn't ask any follow-up questions to help get any context on why he thought, would he be negotiating with these guys? But he could have said, here's what I think Jim Crane could have said, which is, I want these guys to be back and I will negotiate with them at the end of the season. But right now I want their full effort on the playoffs. He could have said that. He didn't say that. He said, we will evaluate at the end of the season. So yeah, I primarily put it on Crane, on Jim Crane. The second question becomes then, should journalists then report on this story, right? And my answer is obviously yes, right? At some level, we want journalists to just tell us what important people say and what important people think. But why has Jim Crane not given a contract extension to either James Click or Dusty Baker? We don't know because he hasn't said it. And it's a question I think that is important for journalists to, one, try to get an answer to, but also two, it's an important bit of, look, if we want journalists to tell us what's likely coming, then it's a important bit of speculation. So yeah, almost all of the blame here, in my opinion, goes to Jim Crane.
Andy, I want you to get a follow-up to that. But before I do, and also think about this, like, to me, to some degree, I think it's not a bad decision to sort of want to check in on Dusty after the season because he is 70-something years old. His answer might be very different if, in fact, the Astros do or don't win the World Series. So to me, that doesn't seem, but you can't say that out loud. Well, Dusty's old, so I'll check in on him later. So just like respond to Brian, and what do you think about the sort of age factor that comes from Dusty?
I mean, I think it's fair to put the blame at Jim Crane's feet, but as we have seen throughout his ownership, Jim Crane's a really, really bad communicator. He doesn't do it well. I mean, and it's through the cheating scandal after it was revealed in the winter of 2020, didn't handle that well. The Taubman, I think his name was, that issue did not handle that well 5 months earlier. Doesn't understand public relations, doesn't understand how to answer that question. And I'm sure in his world of logistics and shipping and whatever other mafia fronts he runs, it's 100% real that
who's writing the narrative as a journalist, Andy?
I'm not a journalist. We are opining.
We are.
It's clear, it's fully acceptable. And my boss in the corporate world can say, we'll discuss it at a later date. And we all go, okay, because that's not something that you have to explain to somebody who's asking you a question. But I think continuing the narrative of making up things and trying to figure out, well, why wouldn't he sign it? I don't think that's what the media's responsibility is at this point, because I can sit here and say, you know what? Crane told Click to go find a center fielder, and he didn't do it at the trade deadline. And so Crane's pissed off about it. And instead we got Trey Mancini, who hasn't really performed all that well. He's a great story, great guy. Hasn't really upgraded anything that we needed him to upgrade. Got a catcher that hasn't really hit better than Martin Maldonado. And Crane's pissed at it because Click doesn't know how to evaluate what he's getting in trade deals. We gave up trade pieces for that. I mean, but that's completely made up. And anybody doing that, unless your name is Jim Crane or James Click, is just making that narrative up. And I think that's the bigger story, is the media is just trying to basically stick that bamboo shoot under your fingernail to irritate you enough to try to get you to the point of, oh, well, I hate Jim Crane, or Jim Click's a baby and he should do that. It's just, that's where the distraction is. I don't think the players give a shit, frankly. They may like Dusty. Some of them may not like Dusty. That it's irregardless, and that's not a word, they're going to show up next season if they're under contract with Joe Espada or whoever happens to be managing this team. And the general manager, whoever's sitting in that seat, will still be trading for guys and signing guys and evaluating the draft. The life will go on, but we live in this moment of oh my God, we've got to panic about this thing that is amorphous and we don't know how to describe it. So we're just going to put some shape around it and make you think you have an opinion about it. That's my issue with the media. We're having two conversations here. I think Crane's a horrible communicator, at least in public. I think Click is doing the right thing by not expounding on any of his thoughts on it because he's a professional and probably, if he's not coming back to the Astros, certainly wants another job in Major League Baseball. And one of the quickest ways not to get that other job is to voice your opinion against an owner. That's a real thing. Click and Dusty don't get along. So there's a bunch of variables in there that none of us and nobody really has the answers to. And if you're going to say, I am writing an opinion about what I think is happening, that's a completely different thing than what Brian T. Smith and Brian McTaggart and Chandler Rome are hired to do at this point in their careers.
Brian, I want to get one final thought on you to respond to that. But also I think, Jim Crane has a point. If the mandate was go find a center fielder and you didn't do that, that's just you not doing your job. And I think any human person can understand if that's really part of the issue. Any final thoughts on this before we talk a little bit of rosters?
Yeah, two thoughts here. One specifically about Jim Crane. You know who Jim Crane should hire to do PR for him?
Us.
Drayton McClain. Drayton was really good at that, but frankly, I got tired of Drayton being in the radio booth talking to Milo all the time because it seemed to be a cover for I'm not actually spending on making the organization good or signing my draft picks.
Did you have a good time at the park, Brian? Were the people friendly when you got ushered down to your seats?
You know, when I didn't have a good time is when he thought signing Carlos Lee was the solution to his problems rather than signing a bunch of draft picks. But anyway, this is
or Matsui's ankle fissures that kept him out for half a season.
That's a 15-year-old, we can do that on our 15-year-old podcast. One general point to make about media in general today, and this is true for all sorts of things, sports and politics and frankly, entertainment in great ways, which is we get a ton more choice on what media we consume.
Sure.
And you are under no obligation to consume media you do not enjoy or that makes you annoying or frustrating. And that includes, whichever pop starlet you like or do not like, whatever, will you want to stream, and frankly, whatever you follow on your social media, whatever sort of media narrative you want. And if you want, hey, this is what the team's putting out there, then, there's plenty of sources for that. If you want people to challenge that, you can. And if you just want to watch the games, you can do that as well. And I think that's that's a benefit of the world today if we choose to take advantage of it.
One quick thought on rosters before I kind of get to some business I need to deal with. And that is right now, it seems like the biggest debate is Christian Javier. What happens to Javier? I am of the firm believer that he should be a starter definitely in the LCS round. Obviously the DS is different. You might only need the three guys. Brian, he's been really impressive. Isn't he on something like a 25 straight scoreless innings streak? 25.1. So just thoughts on Javier, and then we'll get him from Andy, and then some fun. Not that this hasn't been a blast.
If Dusty got fired tomorrow and I got hired, one, Astros would be in trouble in general. But two, you'd really have some questions about Jim Crane in that case, or James Click. And three, but I would have Christian Javier start the third game of the American League Division Series. He's the third best pitcher on this team. I think by talent and quality, it's, he may have passed Lance McCullers.
Well, first of all, you just
has passed him in performance this year, and I think I'd make him the number 3 starter.
You have just upset Michael Schwab, who we believe really is Lance McCullers, but you just upset him.
Look, I don't care where we bury Christian Javier as long as we bury our opponent in Game 3 of the American League Division Series.
Andy?
100% agree with Brian, and I don't think McCullers' issues are anything more than he's just coming off of a rehab that took a really long time, and the start that he gets tonight will be his 8th start of the season. Right. So he has time to become more consistent. Unfortunately, the way the calendar is going to fall, that probably happens next year. Meanwhile, Christian Javier has in some ways been the stopper that this team has needed. Not that we've gone on long losing streaks, but has been consistently good to brilliant most of the season. Started a no-hitter in New York, carried another no-hitter, I believe, in the last 2 starts or something into the 5th or 6th inning. Has just been really, really, really good, and appears to be one of the real success stories of the Astros pitching development, in that he continues to adjust to the league and get better and understand his stuff, understand where his spin rate comes from. It just, everything's good about him. And in that respect, I think he probably has passed Lance McCullers right now. The nod to McCullers obviously is playoff experience, and that is something that you certainly consider. And I understand why he would be third, and why everybody expects him to be third. But I really hope this franchise takes a commitment to Kristen Javier in the offseason, explains that he's never going back to the bullpen, which unfortunately he's probably going to be, certainly in the ALDS if he's not the third starter. But if we advance to a championship series, which frankly is not a given, because we're going to be facing either Toronto or Seattle, it looks like. And at least one of those teams is pretty frightening, and the other one of those teams is going to make a hell of a story if they do well in the playoffs. So, but yeah, there is nothing bad about Kristen Javier. We're not in the days of him not making the roster, and there's another starter who probably could have that conversation about, although he's done well, Luis Garcia, for the last 7 starts.
Been good, yeah.
But it's, I think we make the argument that he's third and the Astros probably see him as fourth, and I understand it. I just don't necessarily agree with it.
I mean, honestly, frankly, I would put him at third as well. I've long been a big fan, and I don't know, I would definitely put him third, and I agree. I hope that this is the last time we will be discussing him being in the bullpen. Regarding the playoffs, and we'll talk a little bit more about this next week, but I just hate the fact that they don't reseed. The NFL reseeds. I don't know if the NBA does because I don't watch it, but the very concept that the Astros will end up maybe having the toughest path to the LCS, I think is just, again, baseball not fully understanding how sports work. But some good news. Today is Dottie announcement day. So those of you who watch this show and also listen to Let's Get To, jump in and find out who won the Dotties this year. And we also do some internal Dotties, and I'm giving them one to both of you guys. This has been what you guys have done with this show and really elevated it. It's actually, from our numbers, on pace with Let's Get To as far as the numbers of watches and listens, which, I think for the fact that we kind of all just tweet it once and then we let it live, I think is a real testament to just the talent you guys bring to the table. So congratulations. You will get your little rodeo belt buckles. Brian, you'll get yours in the mail, and Andy, you demand yours in person.
I do, and with the bourbon.
Wow. Brian, but yeah, congratulations, you guys. You really have done a great job this season, and I can't wait to get through the playoffs with you.
Thank you. And my wife is a huge League of Their Own fan, so that I'm the one who wins a Dottie Award in this house will be a thing we'll get to discuss. So
you two are absolutely the most competitive couple I've ever met, and I love everything about it because you're so sweet to each other. But yet, boy, I hope he loses all baseball games. All right, that does wrap us up. We will be back on Monday. Remember this, guys, as we get out of here, no matter what happens in the next 3 games, the Astros will not have had a losing streak longer than 4 games this season. Go Astros.
104 wins is just absolutely nuts by any standards, and something I don't think any of us expected. So I'm really going to enjoy that over the next 3 games, and then enjoy watching other teams in the playoffs this weekend and not having to stress about it. Go Astros.
It's never a good thing when the NL East team visits Minute Maid Park in October. Go Astros.
Go Astros is a presentation from Twitchy Dolphin Media and part of the Let's Get To Baseball Network.